everyone, this is chapter 9, why this will be your best group project ever. Key topics for today: define group and distinguish the different types of groups. Identify the 5 stages of group development. Show how role requirements change in different situations. Demonstrate how norms and status exert influence on an individual's behavior. Show how group size affects group performance. Contrast the benefits and disadvantages of cohesive groups. We now know where productivity comes from. It comes from challenged, empowered, excited, rewarded teams of people. And that's by Jack Welch, the CEO of General Electric. A group is defined as 2 or more individuals, interacting and interdependent, who have come together to achieve particular objectives. Groups can be either formal or informal. A formal group is a designated work group defined by an organization's structure. An example of this would be airline team flight attendants, the crew, or the restaurant workers in the front of the house or the back of the house at a restaurant. An informal group is a group that is neither formally structured nor organizationally determined, such as a group that appears in response to the need for a social contract. What's an example of this? Let's look at one now.
Okay, well, I have the tablecloth. Don't forget the flatware.
Sure thing, Pam. Can't wait.
Oscar, Toby, and I are founding members of the Finer Things Club. We meet once a month to discuss books and art, celebrate culture in a very civilized way. Sometimes the debate can get heated, but we're always respectful. There is no paper, no plastic, and no work talk allowed. It's very exclusive.
So that's an example of an informal group. Social identity theory. This is the perspective that considers when and why individuals consider themselves members of groups. An example of this might be sports teams, when you feel upset when they lose or happy when they win, even if you're not on the team. There's in-groups and out-groups. In-group favoritism. This is a perspective in which we see members of our in-group as better than other people, and people not in our group as all the same. The out-group is the inverse of an in-group. It's an out-group can mean anyone outside the group, but more usually an identified other group. An example of this might be there's been newer concerns that humans are the in-group, and that non-humans, aka robots, are the out-groups, known as pan-humanist social identity. Developing a social identity. Several characteristics make a social identity important to a person. Similarity, us versus them. Distinctiveness, striving to achieve a positive self-concept. Status, which is the perceived group status, or uncertainty reduction through group concept. And there's a little joke there with the penguin saying, which one of us is me? Identifying the 5 stages of group development. There's forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. This 5 stages model was created by Bruce Tuckerman. The first meeting sets the group's direction. The first phase of group activity is one of inertia and thus makes slower progress. A transition takes place exactly when the group has used up half its allotted time. This transition imitates major changes. A second phase of inertia will follow the transition. The group's last meeting will be characterized by markedly accelerated activity. Group effectiveness. Groups proceed through the stages of group development at different rates. Those with a strong sense of purpose and strategy rapidly achieve high performance and improve over time. Similarly, groups that begin with a positive social focus appear to achieve the performing stage more rapidly. Groups don't always proceed clearly from one stage to the next. The punctuated equilibrium model. This is a set of phases that temporary groups go through that involves transactions between inertia and activity. No, not all groups fit the 5-stage model. Temporary groups with deadlines have their own unique sequencing of actions or inaction, usually with action resulting from an issue. Group evolution occurs in rapid, radical spurts rather than gradually over time. Sorry, I'm going back to that. An example. Let's imagine a company produces a successful product for many years with a stable organizational structure and practices. That's a period of equilibrium. Punctuated change is when a disruptive technology enters the market, challenging the product line. The company must then change rapidly. The new equilibrium is the period after the intense change when the company stabilizes again. Long periods of stability followed by short bursts of change and adaptation is an example of this punctuated equilibrium model. What are some defining properties of that are important in groups? These would be roles, norms, status, size, cohesiveness, and diversity. Roles. A set of expected behavior patterns attributed to someone occupying a given position in a social unit. Role perception. This is one's perception of how to act in a given situation. Role expectations. This is how others believe one should act in a given situation. And psychological conflict. Role conflict. This is a situation in which an individual faces divergent role expectations. So an example of role conflict might be when someone works and also is a mother and needs to take care of her child. Zimbardo's prison experiment is a good example of this. This actually proved too effective for showing how quickly people adapt to new roles. This video is about 30 minutes long, but I added a 7-minute summary one that you can watch for a few minutes instead of the original one. So that's the 30-minute one. And if you don't have time to watch that, this is a 7-minute video about the Zimbardo experiment.
The Zimbardo prison experiment.
And this summarizes it in a shorter
Also known as the
form.
Stanford prison experiment. And this study was conducted by Philip Zimbardo at Stanford University in 1971. And this experiment, like the other experiments that we've talked about, like the Ash study and the Milgram study, was trying to figure out how conformity and obedience can result in people behaving in ways that are counter to how they would act on their own, and even counter to how they think that they would act. And as before, the answer is complicated, because while we assume that only bad people would do bad things, this isn't always the case. And certain situations can make otherwise ordinary people behave in extraordinarily terrible ways. The original goal of the study was to look at how social norms and social conventions might influence the behaviors of participants who were playing the roles of prisoners and guards. So if you've ever talked about the study in your psychology class, you probably know the basic summary of it. That these students who were randomly assigned to be either prisoners or guards eventually got so caught up in their roles that the study needed to be stopped early. But there's a lot more to it than that. Because while the premise of the study is really disturbing, the details of the study are even more so. And let me state right out front that these participants knew all about the study. There was no deception here. I also want to note that the people who participated were the very definition of normal. They were recruited by newspaper ads and they were tested to make sure that they didn't have any kind of medical or physical or psychological problems. And they all had similar backgrounds. They were middle-class students. In the end, 18 students participated and they were randomly assigned with a coin flip to be either guards or prisoners. And importantly, the participants all knew that this assignment was random. Zimbardo wanted to make this prison experiment as real as possible for both the prisoners and the guards. So he actually had the participants in the prisoner condition arrested at unexpected times on what to them was a completely random day. And I don't mean that it was a fake arrest, like with students in fake police hats putting them in the back of their friend's car. I mean actual real arrests by the Palo Alto Police Department, who arrested them and handcuffed them and fingerprinted them, booked them, took a mugshot, and put them in an ill-fitting prison uniform. And after this, they were brought to the mock prison, which was actually in the basement of the Stanford Psychology Building. Each prisoner was given a number that they were supposed to be referred to instead of their name, and they were given ankle chains to remind them of their prisoner status, and they were put in mock cells. They had mattresses in them, but there weren't any things like windows, and there weren't any clocks. And the idea behind that decision was to try to separate these prisoners from the outside world, to really simulate a prison environment. Zimbardo had also met with the participants playing the guards before the start of the experiment, and he had told them that they were not supposed to physically harm the prisoners. They could, however, try to create a situation that would lead to fear, or loss of privacy and control, or loss of individuality. The guards were also given uniforms, and they were given batons, which were supposed to be for threats of physical violence and not actual physical violence, and also mirrored sunglasses. And they were instructed to refer to the prisoners by their numbers and not by their names. So basically, these guards were basically free to do whatever was necessary in order to maintain law and order, except for physically harm the participants. So what happened? Well, the first day of the study was pretty uneventful. The prisoners really didn't seem to take it all that seriously, and the guards felt a little bit awkward giving them orders, and so nothing really happened. But then the participants who were the prisoners started to get pretty tired of their situation, and so they started to rebel against the guards. And specifically, some of them barricaded themselves in their cell. And at this point, the guards had to decide what to do next. Were they just going to let this go, or were they going to try to gain control over the situation? And in the end, the guards saw this behavior as an affront to their authority, their fake authority, and they began to fight back. And in response to this, the prisoners tore off their numbers and they cursed at the guards. And at some point, it isn't clear exactly when, the guards started to see the other participants as actual dangerous prisoners that needed controlling. And in response to what they saw was a threat from these prisoners, they used fire extinguishers on them and forced them to strip down. And in the end, the guards did regain some control, and the prisoners who rebelled were put in a closet that was being used as solitary confinement, which was big enough to stand, but the prisoners couldn't lie down or sit. After only 36 hours, the prisoners started to break down. And I mean that pretty literally. One prisoner started showing signs of depression and uncontrollable rage. He screamed and he cried and he yelled obscenities and eventually had to be removed from the experiment. And he might have been the first, but he wasn't the only one who had a mental breakdown. By day 3, the situation went even further. Some of the participants decided to go on a hunger strike. And in response to this, all of the prisoners were forced to repeat their numbers over and over again. They were forcibly made to exercise, things like doing push-ups until they were exhausted. Guards started to withhold bathroom privileges, instead making them do their business in buckets and then not allowing the prisoners to empty them. And they tried to make them turn on each other. They tried to make them scream at each other. And they basically tried to break them down. And while all of this was going on, while all of this was happening, while prisoners were stripped naked and put in solitary confinement in a closet, Zimbardo was there. And I think that this is important because Zimbardo is not a bad guy. But by taking on the role of the prison warden, he involved himself in this situation.
So feel free to watch the 30-minute video if you have time, but that's a good example of roles and how they can impact people. Demonstrate how norms and status exert influence on an individual's behavior. Groups give thoughtful feedback, respect others and their thoughts, on task all the time, use soft voices, participate actively, and stay with your group. Norms. These are acceptable standards of behavior within a group that are shared by the group's members. There are performance norms, appearance norms, social arrangement norms, and resource allocation norms. Identifying norms. As college students, you have been exposed to a continuing series of norms. From elementary school on, you've learned what is considered to be proper behavior in the classroom. Take a moment and think about unwritten rules of behavior that are in the business school, teamwork, meetings, class discussions, and clubs. How many norms can you identify? How many of these norms were you consciously aware of prior to listing them? The Hawthorne studies. These are on page 143 to 144. The full-scale appreciation of the influence of norms on worker behavior did not occur until the early 1930s, following studies undertaken between 1924 and 1932 at the Western Electric Company's Hawthorne Works in Chicago. To get more information on this, there's a link here as well. The Hawthorne studies helped conclude that workers were highly responsive to additional attention from their managers and the feeling that their managers actually cared about and were interested in their work. The studies also concluded that although financial motives are important, social factors are equally important in defining worker productivity. An example of conformity is on page 43, the Solomon Asch study, where they're matching lines. Researchers said the wrong answer and the participants would agree sometimes to conform. It's more typical that they would if it's with their reference group. There's considerable evidence that groups can place strong pressure on individual members to change their attitudes and behaviors to conform to the group standard. The pressure that group exerts for conformity was demonstrated by this study. So as you can see, there's two cards. They'll say which one is the one that matches, and they intentionally said the wrong one and people still followed suit. And this was more likely to happen if it was the reference group. Conformity is the adjustment of one's behavior to align with the norms of the group. Reference groups are important to which individuals belong or hope to belong, and with whose norms individuals are likely to conform. Conformity effects are not always bad. So one example of this is pro-social norms, such as donating to charity. Negative norms and group outcomes. Deviant workplace behavior or antisocial behavior or workplace incivility. This is voluntary behavior that violates significant organizational norms, and in so doing threatens the well-being of the organization or its members. Deviant workplace behavior is more likely if it's supported by group norms. Please make sure you understand some examples of deviant workplace behavior. As you can see here, production deviants might be leaving early, property deviants, sabotaging equipment or accepting kickbacks. Political deviants might be showing favoritism, and personal aggression, which is more serious, such as sexual harassment or verbal abuse. Group property 3, status. Status or socially defined position or rank given to groups or group members by others. Status characteristics theory is the theory that states that differences in status characteristics create status hierarchies within groups. Status derives from one of 3 sources. The power a person wields over others. So for example, control resources will be high status. So someone who has a lot of money, for example. A person's ability to contribute to a group's goal is another way that status is derived. And the individual's personal characteristics. So for example, valued attributes like money, intelligence, good looks, and friendly personality. Show how group size affects group performance. Group size affects the group's overall behavior. Large groups are good for gaining diverse input. Smaller groups are better at doing something with the input. Social loafing is the tendency for individuals to expend less effort when working collectively than when working individually. It directly challenges the assumption that productivity of a group as a whole is greater than the sum of the productivity of individuals in it. An example of this is the Ringelmann effect. The first research on social loafing came from Max Ringelmann way back in 1913. He had people pulling on a rope and compared the maximum they could have pulled based on individual tests to how much each person actually pulled. The results were kind of sad. With 8 people, each one only pulled half as much as their maximum potential strength. To avoid social loafing, set group goals so the group has a common purpose to strive toward. Increase intergroup competition which focuses on the shared group outcome. Engage in peer evaluations. Select members who have high motivation and prefer to work in groups. Base group rewards in part on each member's unique contributions. Cohesiveness. This is the degree to which group members are attracted to each other and are motivated to stay in the group. An example is when cohesive and performance norms are high, productivity is high. Groups differ in their cohesiveness or the degree to which the members are attracted to each group, to each other, and are motivated to stay in the group. Fundamental factors affecting group cohesion: similarity, stability, size, support, and satisfaction. How do you increase cohesiveness? Ways to encourage group cohesiveness include making the group smaller, encouraging agreement with group goals, increasing the time members spend together, increase the group's status and the perceived difficulty of attaining membership, stimulating competition with other groups, giving rewards to the group rather than to individual members, and physically isolating the group. And then the last property, diversity. This is the extent to which members of a group are similar to or different from each other. There's differences in skills, abilities, or other characteristics needed for the job, which is functional diversity. Challenges of group diversity, fault lines. These are perceived divisions that split groups into 2 or more subgroups based on individual differences such as sex, race, age, work experience, and education. Differences can lead to conflict, but also creates the ability for unique problem solving. Groupthink is a psychological phenomenon that occurs within a group of people when the desire for harmony and conformity in the group results in an irrational decision-making outcome. Groups value cohesion and consensus more than evaluating alternatives and solutions. Don't consider risks or all available information. So this will happen with groupthink. They won't consider the risks or all the available information. The weakness of group decision-making is that it's time-consuming. So something to think about. If you're working in a group, it might be more time-consuming. Groups versus individual decision-making. When teams adopt a constructive interaction style, approach problems in a rational, supportive manner, then the interactive efforts of people working together will have a greater impact than the sum of their independent efforts. Groups generate more complete information and knowledge. They offer increased diversity of views. This opens up the opportunity for more approaches and alternatives to be considered. Groups lead to increased acceptance of a solution. The weaknesses, as I mentioned before, it is time-consuming. There's a conformity pressure. One or few members can dominate group discussion, and group decisions suffer from ambiguous responsibility. Whether groups are more effective than individuals depends on the criteria you use. In terms of accuracy, group decisions will tend to be more accurate. On average, groups make better quality decisions than individuals. If decision effectiveness is defined in terms of speed, individuals are superior. If creativity is important, groups tend to be more effective than individuals. If effectiveness means the degree of acceptance of the final solution achieves, groups are better. Individuals tend to be more efficient than groups. And this is the rational and interpersonal skills and processes. In the rational decision-making model, first you define the problem, identify the decision criteria, allocate weights to the criteria, develop alternatives, and evaluate the alternatives. And these are interpersonal skills and processes, listening to others, supporting their efforts to do well and building on their ideas, differing with others in a constructive manner, participating equally in group discussions, striving for consensus with respect to group decisions and solutions. Constructive defensive and aggressive defensive group styles. And we can skip through this. To improve group problem solving and decision making, as individuals, seek out opportunities to practice group decision making, solicit feedback on rational interpersonal skills, and as a group, actively work together to create a more constructive interaction style, set goals for improvement, monitoring progress towards those goals. Groupthink, as I mentioned, occurs when the norms for conforming in a homogeneous group become so strong and members are highly concerned about maintaining unanimity that they fail to critically evaluate their options and consequently make a poor decision. Here's an example of groupthink from 12 Angry Men.
Okay, gentlemen, if I can have your attention. You fellas can handle this thing any way that you want to. I'm not going to make any rules. We can, well, discuss it first and then vote on it. That's, of course, one way. And, well, we can vote on it right now. And
I think it's customary to take a preliminary vote.
Yeah, let's vote. Who knows, maybe we can all get out of here, huh?
Uh-huh. Okay, then I think that, of course, you know that we have a first-degree murder charge here, and if we vote the accused guilty, we've got to send him to the chair. That's mandatory.
I think we know that.
Yeah, let's see who swear.
Okay, anyone does want to vote?
I'll make.
Okay, then just remember that this has to be 12-0 either way. That's the law. Okay, are we ready? All those voting guilty, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, that's 11 guilty. Those voting not guilty? 1. Right. 11 guilty, 1 not guilty. Well, now we know where we are. Boy, oh boy, there's always one.
Oh, what are we doing now?
I guess we talk.
Boy, oh boy.
You really think he's innocent? I don't know.
I mean, you sat in court with the rest of us. You heard what we did. The kid's a dangerous killer. You could see it.
He's 18 years old.
Well, that's old enough. He stabbed his own father 4 inches into the chest. They proved it a dozen different ways in court. Would you like me to list them for you?
No. Then what do you want? I just want to talk.
Well, what's there to talk about? 11 men in here think he's guilty. No one had to think about it twice except you.
I want to ask you something. Do you believe his story? I don't know whether I believe it or not. Maybe I don't.
So how come you vote not guilty?
Well, there were 11 votes for guilty. It's not easy to raise my hand and send a boy off to die without talking about it first.
Well, now, who says it's easy?
No one.
What, just because I voted fast? I honestly think the guy's guilty. Couldn't change my mind if you talked for 100 years.
I'm not trying to change your mind. It's just that we're talking about somebody's life here. We can't decide it in 5 minutes, supposing we're wrong.
Supposing we're wrong. Supposing this whole building should fall down on my head. You can suppose anything.
That's right.
Look, what's the difference how long it takes? Suppose we do it in 5 minutes, so what?
Let's take an hour. Ball game doesn't start till 8 o'clock.
Who's got something to say?
I'm willing to sit for an hour.
Great. I heard a pretty good story last night. That is not why we're sitting here. All right, then you tell me. What are we sitting here for?
What actually happened is this. The boy stayed home, had another fight with his father, stabbed him to death, and left the house at 10 minutes after 12. He even remembered to wipe the knife clean of fingerprints. Now, are you trying to tell me that this knife really fell through a hole in the boy's pocket? Someone picked it up off the street, went to the boy's house, and stabbed his father with it just to test its sharpness?
No, I'm just saying it's possible the boy lost his knife and that somebody else stabbed his father with a similar knife. It's just possible.
Take a look at this knife. It's a very unusual knife. I've never seen one like it. Neither had the storekeeper who sold it to the boy. Aren't you asking us to accept a pretty incredible coincidence?
I'm just saying a coincidence is possible.
And I say it's not possible.
Where did that come from? Same knife.
Quiet, Jules. Where did you get it? I went out walking for a couple of hours last night. I walked through the boy's neighborhood. I bought that in a little pawn shop just 2 blocks from the boy's house. It cost $6.
It's against the law to buy or sell switchblade knives.
That's right, I broke the law.
Listen, you pulled a real bright trick. Now, supposing you tell me what it proves. Maybe there are 10 knives like that, so what?
Maybe there are.
Well, what does it mean? You found another knife like it. What's that, the discovery of the age or something?
You mean you're asking us to believe that somebody else did the stabbing with exactly the same kind of knife? The odds are 1,000,000 to 1.
It's possible.
But not very probable. Okay, fellas, let's take our seats. There's no point standing around all over the place.
You know, it's interesting that he'd find a knife exactly like the one the boy bought.
What's interesting about it? Interesting.
I don't know, I just thought it was interesting.
There are still 11 of us here who think he's guilty.
Right. What do you think you're going to accomplish? You're not going to change anybody's mind. So if you want to be stubborn and hang this jury, go ahead. The kid will be tried again and found guilty as sure as he's born.
Probably right.
That was an example of groupthink. There are 8 symptoms characterized by Irving Janis in Victims of Groupthink book in 1972. There's an illusion of invulnerability, collective rationalizations, and the unquestioned belief in the group's inherent morality, stereotyped views of outgroup, direct pressure, self-censorship, and self-appointed mind guards. To minimize groupthink, you can monitor group size, encourage group leaders to play an impartial role, appoint one group member to play the role of devil's advocate, and utilize exercises that stimulate active discussion of diverse alternatives without threatening the group and intensifying identity protection. Understanding team decisions. There can be benefits and drawbacks. The more knowledge becomes available and there's more alternatives and they're generally considered, you can avoid traps of oversight, blind spots, and biases and improve acceptance of decisions, and it can lead to synergy. Some drawbacks of team decisions are they require more time, they can be dominated by an individual or clique, it can lead to compromise decisions such as groupthink that we just went over, and it can lead to excessively risky or conservative decisions. group shift. All right, if you want to go through the rest of the slides, feel free. But that is chapter 9. We're going to move on to chapter 10.